am Mhairi, Mhairi. Trust me, does spell vary. Though I'm aware it does also happen to spell hairy, which is unfortunate, very unfortunate. But yeah, Mhairi spells vary. It's Gaelic, it's Scottish. But it's one of those names that predictive text spell checker can never get right. It's a name that's always pronounced wrong, and it's always, predictive text, it can't cope with it. That's going to be a bit of a theme of my talk this morning. Not the unfortunate mispronunciations of my name, but the limitations of technology, and particularly the limitations of AI when they try to grapple with the complexities of human language. I'm going to be talking about large language models, and I'm going to be talking about ChatGPT. But before I get into that, a little bit about who I am, about the work that I do. I'm an ethics fellow at the Alan Turing Institute. So the Alan Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for AI and Data Science. So as an ethics fellow, my work looks at ethical and social considerations around AI and data science. So in particular, I'm interested in anticipating what the risks or potential harms of AI might be and how we can develop approaches to mitigate and minimize those risks. But also, I'm really interested in how we can maximize the value, societal value of AI and data across society and realize the enormous benefits that AI can bring across society when it's designed and developed responsibly. Now, I used to always say that one of the things that, I still do say it, but one of the things I really enjoy about working in this area and working at the Alan Turing Institute, the National Institute for AI and Data Science, is that there's a real opportunity to inform public discussions, inform public conversations about AI, to demystify what AI is, but also what it isn't, and clear up all the kind of hype and sensationalism that is going around about AI at the moment. I used to always say, that there was maybe like every 3 or 4 months there'd be like a big news story that would break, that would bring AI into public consciousness, that would generate, public interest around AI. Those were simpler times. 6 months ago, I would say every 3 or 4 months there'll be a big news story about AI. Then this happened. ChatGPT launched at the end of November last year, and we went from being, like every 3 or 4 months being a big news story about AI, to now it feels like it's every 3 or 4 hours there's a new news story about AI. There's so much interest, there's so much fast pace of innovation and development that's bringing AI consistently into the public spotlight and into public scrutiny. We've seen ChatGPT, since it was launched, a real rush to experiment and deploy this in a wide range of sectors, a wide range of contexts, and to use it for a whole range of purposes. Everything from, ChatGPT is being used for chatbots and customer service. It's being used to provide advice, including to mental health care patients. It's even, I've been told, it's being used to craft witty, intelligent, attractive-sounding conversation starters for Tinder matches, apparently. So it's being used everywhere, and there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of interest in what this could do. If somehow any of you have managed not to hear about ChatGPT over the last 6 months, I'd be very surprised, but just in case, I can have a quick overview of what this is. Essentially, it is a fairly sophisticated predictive text. So like the predictive text on my phone that can't spell my name right, it's a fairly advanced, sophisticated version of a predictive text program. ChatGPT is based on a large language model, built on a large language model. When it was first launched in November, it was GPT3.5, and now GPT4. So essentially, it's a large language model. What large language models do is they're trained on huge data sets of human language, and they're trained to recognize patterns in that language, to be able to predict what combination of words would be a convincing or a compelling response to a prompt, to be able to mimic and imitate human language. ChatGPT has been trained on a huge data set, so basically the whole of the internet. So it has trained on all kinds of human language. It's trained on kind of legal documents, it's trained on poetry, it's trained on essays, it's trained on social media content, everything. And from that, it can detect different types, genres, different styles of writing. So you can ask it to write you a haiku, you can ask it to write you a sonnet, you could ask it to write you a convincing legal document. Pretty much anything, and it can do this pretty well. You can also ask it to write code, or to find faults or find faults or errors within lines of code, and it can also do that pretty well. But it's not perfect, of course. Basically, it's all style and no substance. So it can mimic the style of human language. It can impersonate human language. It can write something in a particular style or within a combination of words which is statistically likely to be convincing as how a human might have written that. But it has absolutely no idea of what those words mean. It has absolutely no way of understanding the context of those words or the significance of those words. So it's, all style, no substance. It's just mimicking how we talk, but not understanding what we say. Anyway, as I say, there's been a lot of experimentation using this across a wide range of sectors, a wide range of contexts, and a lot of excitement about how this could be used in the future. But with that, there's also been a lot of concern, a lot of worry about what the potential impacts of this might be. Impacts on education, where this can be used to draft essays or assignments. Impacts on professions, where this might be used to automate new jobs or automate jobs or roles. Impacts on cybersecurity, and even concerns that it might, develop superintelligence, take over the world, and destroy us all, which is nice. I'm going to come back to that. But for now, I want to focus on what does this mean for developers? So what does ChatGPT, or advances in generative AI, mean for developers? And there are lots of different takes on this. Some see it as well as a new set of tools. As I said, it can be really useful for checking your code, for debugging code. But there are also concerns that it has been shown to be pretty good at writing code. And there are concerns that this could lead to risks to jobs. In some organizations, there might be employers who see this as maybe a shortcut or a cheaper or faster way to write code. Again, I'm going to come back to that. I think what we heard in the last presentation around the importance of creativity or problem solving, of human skills, which ChatGPT can never replicate and never replace. I'm going to come back to that point. But what I want to focus on for now is this last point, as ChatGPT is potentially providing the foundations for building new systems or building new software. Because large language models are what we refer to as foundation models. So foundation models in AI are large, general-purpose models. They're trained on huge data sets, and they're trained not for any particular one task or function, but they're trained to be something which is general-purpose, which you can build on top of, which you can apply in lots of different contexts. They're the foundations. And essentially what this means is that you might build a system, you might build a software using ChatGPT or using GPT4, the large language model that underpins that, and users or the end users of these systems are going to interact with what's built on top of it. They're going to interact with the software, with the system which is built on top of these large language models, and not necessarily aware of what's underneath and what's underpinning it. But when we're thinking about developing things or developing on top of a large language model, on top of a foundation model, it's important that we really scrutinize what is underneath these systems, what is holding it up, and what are the kinds of ethical considerations that we need to take into account when we're deciding whether or not to build on these foundation models. So, we're going to inspect our foundations, putting hard hats on, and a clipboard. I always feel important when I have a clipboard, and this is quite possibly the biggest clipboard I've ever seen. So we're thinking about building inspection. So when you're building a building, you have a building inspection report, right? And it's important that you think about the foundations in particular and scrutinize the foundations, what they're made of, how they've been built, to know whether your building is going to be fit for purpose. And it's the same when we're building on top of foundation models. We need to scrutinize the foundations and think about, are they fit for purpose? Now, of course, the first thing is, well, what have they been made of? What's the construction materials? What's been used to build these foundations? In a building report, that might be like cement and mortar. But in the case of a foundation model, it's, well, what data have they been trained on? And we know, in AI, it's well known that a model that has been trained on biased or incomplete or inaccurate data is going to produce biased outcomes. It's going to produce poor outcomes. And it's the same with large language models. So in the case of ChatGPT, I said it was trained basically on the whole of the internet. Now, it's often claimed, that an AI is going to be like a mirror of society. It's going to reflect back what it's learned about us. It was trained on the internet. Now, I think it was quite to what extent does the internet really reflect society? Can it really be a mirror of society or a mirror of the world? And of course, the data that is on the internet is a very skewed, a very particular representation of the world. It has disproportionate amounts of extreme views, polarizing views. We know that politically powerful or economically powerful voices dominate more than others. Certain voices, certain views are amplified, and others are not. And are less represented. And we know that minoritized groups are more likely to be represented through stereotypical representations. And all of this affects what is able to be produced through these large language models and what the outputs of ChatGPT are able to produce. So it's really important, if we're thinking about building a system that is built on these foundations, that we think about what the potential biases, what the potential limitations of that data are, and how that might affect the systems that we create and the outcomes they might produce. Now, the next point then on our inspection report is it the model suitable for purposes? Now, again, if we had a general purpose foundation for buildings, we might be a little bit nervous. You know, is that foundation going to be able to support a house the same as it supports a hospital? Is it going to be able to support a school? Is it going to be able to support a prison? And we might question whether a foundation can actually do all of those things. But when we think about foundation models, this is kind of what's happening, right? The large language models, they're being deployed in education settings. They're being deployed in healthcare settings, legal settings, entertainment settings. And we have to think very carefully about the different sensitivities and the different risks across each of those domains and each of those contexts. And is it really fit for purpose across all those different purposes? And really think carefully about the potential sensitivities and the different risks as we apply these in different settings. Will it withstand extreme events? That might be hurricanes or earthquakes, but in this case, it probably means malicious actors, cybersecurity threats. Is it really going to withstand that? And what are the particular risks that we need to take into account? Then, has it been built using ethical labor practices? Yeah, when we're thinking about foundations and building, we have to think about the supply chain and the labor practices that have gone into developing the foundations. Now, in the case of ChatGPT, there was an expose a few months ago in Time magazine, which showed that one of the key things about ChatGPT is the moderation API, which prevents it, or to a certain extent prevents it from producing harmful, dangerous, illegal outcomes. But how this was trained was OpenAI outsourced to workers in Kenya, whose job it was to review transcripts of really some of the most extreme harmful content you could imagine. So this was long days for less than $2 an hour, labeling data, which in some cases was descriptions of rape, descriptions of child sexual abuse, descriptions of bestiality, really horrific content, and really harmful for the workers who had few protections. This is how the moderation API was developed to protect end users from being exposed or potentially exposed to this harmful content by directly exposing vulnerable workers to the absolute worst of that content with very few protections. And I think we need to think really carefully about the choices that we make to interact with these systems, taking account of the invisible labor that goes into developing those systems. And that's not an exceptional case. That invisible labor is a key part of all of the development process of a lot of these large AI models. The invisible labor of labeling data to train models. And we need to make conscious choices about to what extent we're willing to support those kinds of practices. Finally, the environmental impact of the model. The environmental impact of AI is often kind of imperceptible to end users. It's often kind of invisible, but it is significant. In the case of ChatGPT, I read one estimate that said that training ChatGPT had the same carbon footprint of driving a car to the moon and back, which is kind of like numbers that I can't even begin to get my head around. But it's a lot. It's significant. And that's just training the model. That's not refining it. That's not maintaining it as it's being used. That's just training the model. Now, these models are getting bigger and bigger, and the environmental impacts are also getting bigger and bigger. And we need to think about, well, is it worth it? What is it for? Is that worth it if we're using it to make matches on Tinder? Or what kinds of purpose are we going to put this to justify those kinds of impacts? And I think these are all questions and considerations that we need to think about when we are interacting with these systems and when we're potentially integrating them into models and systems that we are building and developing or using. So I said I would come back to the point about whether or not ChatGPT represented a threat to developers. Is it something that we should be concerned about for the developer community? And actually, I don't think so, because while ChatGPT might be good at writing lines of code or debugging code, and while there is definitely speculation in some organizations about potential role of this in development processes, it can never understand what that code is for. It can never understand the context. It doesn't know if it's doing a good job. It doesn't know what the purpose is, what the value is. It doesn't have the creativity or the problem solving. It can't have developer joy, like we heard in the last presentation. It's not capable of any of those things. And so we always are going to need human developers to solve the problems that developers solve. But if it all goes wrong, well, there's always this. Yeah, there's always this. Which brings me on to my last slide, which is, are we all doomed? I've been accused recently of not taking existential risk seriously. I think I've got maybe a few minutes left, so I'm going to have a few minutes to take existential risk very seriously. Because I do take it seriously. I take claims of existential risk very seriously. We've heard a lot of these claims recently in the media. Some of the big players in AI and tech claiming that they're worried that generative AI, systems like ChatGPT, might be capable of developing a superhuman intelligence, might be capable of kind of making their own choices, making their own decisions, and ultimately making decisions that are a risk to humanity, that pose an existential risk to the future of humanity or the future of the planet. I don't believe those. I don't follow that argument. I think AI systems are always going to be computer programs that do what they're programmed to do. We're programming them to do more and more things. They can do a wider range of things. They can do it with a greater degree of sophistication. And in the case of ChatGPT, we're explicitly training programs to replicate and mimic or imitate human language and to appear to do things in a way that replicates how humans do them. And then we're surprised when people think, oh, that seems like it was intelligent. It's not. It's doing exactly what it's programmed to do, and that is to imitate and replicate humans. And then there's the claims that they're developing emergent capabilities, that they're doing things that they weren't programmed to do. But often what those claims are actually doing is doing something that wasn't expected, but is nevertheless programmed. When you really look at what's in the training data, these training data sets are huge. So it's understandable that things are sometimes surprising, but they're there nevertheless. They're in the training data. It's doing what it's programmed to do. So I don't believe that AI is ever going to develop that set of intention to be able to decide to do differently, to do something that it wasn't programmed to do. But why I take these claims very seriously is that when you look at who's saying these things, and when you look at who's making these claims, the idea that AI is a risk to humanity or that AI could develop capabilities that it wasn't programmed to do, have its own intentions, make its own decisions, well, what it's actually doing is saying, look over there. Look at what this risk that AI might somehow be a threat to humanity. Don't look here at the decisions that we are making about how we are designing, developing, and deploying AI today and the risks that this is having in our society today. And that's why I take these claims very seriously, because they're a distraction. And what we really need to be talking about is the ways that AI is being used today, the risks that it poses today, and how we're going to hold the people who are designing, developing, and deploying these systems accountable for how they're used today. And that's the message that I'd like to end with, that we all have responsibility in this. We all have responsibility when we think about the systems that we're engaging with, the systems that we're interacting with, and what we choose to use when we're developing new systems, new software. And I hope to end on a really positive, happy note, and I seem to have reached the existential risk, doom and gloom. So I'm hoping that somebody's going to follow me with something very rosy and cheery. But yeah, thank you, everybody.